Welcome to the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. We are delighted to be hosting this wonderful evening with our local author, Elsa Sjunneson. My name is Danielle Miller, and I'm the director here at the library. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. This is our first time hosting a truly hybrid event, so we hope everything goes smoothly. And hello to our guests on Zoom. If we have any technical issues, thank you for your grace as we resolve them, but I know it'll be a great evening no matter what. And for our guests on Zoom, we do have captioning, and there is ASL interpretation available for you in the webinar. And also for our Zoom audience members, for questions, please use the Q&A. And if you have any technical issues, please use the chat to reach the hosts. And again, welcome. Just a little bit about the Talking Book and Braille Library. We are a statewide library service for anyone unable to read standard print due to blindness, visual impairment, deaf blindness, a physical disability that makes holding a book or turning a page difficult, or a reading disability. We are a program of the Washington State Library and a regional library of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled Library of Congress. We are so happy to be partnering with the Washington Center for the Book to put on this Washington State Book Award event. The Washington State Book Awards are a partnership of the Washington Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book, administered by the Washington State Library and the Seattle Public Library. The Washington Center for the Book promotes literacy and a love of books, reading, and libraries. They celebrate Washington's robust literary heritage and shine a spotlight on the contribution of reading and libraries in strengthening communities and fostering civic engagement. Tonight, our speaker is Elsa Sjunneson. Elsa is a Washington State Book Award winner for Being Seen, One Deafblind Woman's Fight to End Ableism. She is also a Hugo, Aurora, and British Fantasy Award winner. Elsa writes and edits speculative fiction and nonfiction. She has also, I lost my place. She has also been a finalist for the Best Fan Writer Hugo Awards and a winner of the D. Franklin Defying Doomsday Award and a finalist for the Best Game Writing Nebula Award. She has done much work as an editor, including co-guest editor-in-chief of Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction. Elsa is also a disability rights activist and has worked with New Jersey 11th for Change and the New York Disability Pride Parade. We are so excited to have Elsa with us tonight. So please help me welcome her. And Elsa, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. It was an honor to win the Washington State Book Award for Memoir and Biography for a book that is about being deafblind. It's really rare that our voices get heard because so often our voices are coming from our hands, or they're coming from our bodies, or they're coming from the written word. And so it meant a lot to me to be able to speak on behalf of a community that I'm a part of, and that voice was appreciated by the non-disabled community as much as by my own community. That's a rare thing. The book came about because I had the opportunity to write one. I know that sounds funny, but it's true. I had written 10 years worth of essays about why books and movies and TV shows were getting it wrong about deaf and blind characters. And I'd gotten tired. I'd gotten tired of seeing Mr. Magoo run into plate glass walls. I'd gotten tired of seeing blind people do bad things to children on accident or on purpose. I had gotten tired of seeing characters who were deaf, who had no nuance to their deafness. And so I started writing. That's what I do. That's what I've done since I was a tiny human child. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and then all of a sudden there was about 350 pages worth of things I wanted to say to people. And that's the point at which you have to write a book or you have to stop talking about it. So I wrote a book. And that book became a talking point. Over the last 2 years, I've given talks to different audiences. And I think this is the first time that I've had the privilege to be in a room with fellow deafblind people. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity. Because instead of talking to people who have no idea what my life is like, I'm actually talking to people who have a very good idea of what my life is like. Our varieties of deafblindness may be different. They may be more severe or less severe. They may be one version of the spectrum or another, but the embodied experience of deafblindness is a unique one. It's one that is unique to our community. And I am really privileged to be able to speak to fellow deafblind people tonight. That's a big deal to me. And I would not have gotten to do that if it were not for winning this award. So that is probably what I won, is getting to connect with my own community. Tonight, I'm going to read a couple of segments. The first one being from chapter 15, which is the one that keeps getting assigned at universities, and I'm curious as to why, because it's the one about self-identification as a disabled person. We have always thrived in the castle, defying ableism to become yourself.
If you could just pause.
Yep.
Every once in a while. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. What? Yeah, just maybe after every sentence or so.
A pause?
Just breathe every once in a while.
Sure.
Thank you.
Every disabled person has an origin story. Mine is that were it not for a bunch of Wall Street jerks who refused to get vaccinated, I would be non-disabled. Some of my friends would be non-disabled were it not for one stray chromosome. Others, because they didn't have an incident with a truck. You, dear reader, may someday have your own origin story. You could miss a stare, you could catch a disease, you could make friends with a metal straw, you could find yourself disabled in a matter of moments. If we stop looking at these as tragedies and start looking at these as new ways of being, maybe the power of disability stigma would falter just a little bit. Origin stories have resonance. They are what helps us to understand who we are. Because non-disabled culture demands that we look at these origin stories as tragedies, it becomes difficult to mourn the cause of a disability without being perceived as disliking the person that you are. Honoring that change by adjusting language is vital. I'm a pro-vaccination activist. I believe strongly that we should trust in science, that we should eradicate the diseases that disable people. Polio, scarlet fever, measles, mumps, rubella, COVID-19. We should attack them. We should fight them with herd immunity and vaccines, and we should acknowledge that diseases are generally bad. But that does not mean that the result of a disease, a disabled life, is a bad one. That it has less worth or less meaning. A disabled life is still, at its core, a life worth living. My life is worth living. Threading the needle so that I could honor my feelings about the anti-vax population, that I could not want anyone else to have to be disabled in the exact way that I am, and at the same time fight for my equality and the equality of all disabled people, is one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do. It was difficult to find the path, but it's a path worth walking. Disability will always exist. To be human is to be vulnerable, and disability is a factor in physical vulnerability. The human condition is about perpetually changing and degrading as we age. After all, the margin of the population that is considered disabled goes up drastically after the age of 50. Society does not mourn the abled lives of the elderly because it isn't considered a tragedy to simply age out of ability. Which means that it is the perception of when and how you claim disability that determines who mourns for you. I fought hard to feel like I could do both. Fight rubella, but not fight deafblindness. I'm going to skip forward. Okay. Women are socialized to be soft, and disabled women are expected to be even more so, childlike. But once I started embracing my sharpness, I liked myself more. I wrote articles for the university paper, op-eds that rippled out into conversations at the cafeteria that resulted in long theological conversations on my way out of Mass, and that made me no friends in the administration at my Jesuit university. When I stopped trying to behave and started to throw rocks and break windows, it meant that my disabilities stopped being burdens and also started being a part of who I was. There's something to the fact that when I allowed myself to be spiky, when I started to embrace the hedgehog nature that was within me, my disabilities started to hurt less. It started to hurt less that I couldn't see because I knew how to fight. I don't think that all disabled people are unlikable. In fact, I think most of us are quite pleasant once you get to know us, but there's something to the fact that one must be a little bit unpleasant in order to defy society so boldly. Sharp edges keep us alive. To make living in an ableist world bearable, it helps to find your rough edge and to accept it is important. Sanding them down will only lead to misery. I tried so hard to fit in so many different ways. I described myself as only half deaf and half blind for so long. I hid my cane when it mattered. I didn't wear hearing aids. None of it actually helped. Because they were all ways of navigating in shame. I was ashamed of being disabled. I was ashamed of being different. The shame came from so many different places, but ultimately, it took root. I tried to evade my own reality. I tried to laugh it off, to be coy, to pretend. For a long time, I would have been perfectly happy to not be disabled at all. It was only when I started to use the words that fit me that I started to grow into who I was. I didn't start calling myself deafblind until my 30s. I didn't start wearing hearing aids reliably until I was 24. I didn't start using the Braille on elevators or engaging with the disability community until 2011. When I did, I started to value myself as a person, to feel that my life, as it was, had inherent value. My body was worthy of feeling pleasure instead of pain. What ultimately helped me pull myself out of the shame spiral was the disability community on Twitter. One of the most important parts of developing a self-identity as a disabled person is to actually talk to other disabled people. No non-disabled person can substitute for that. Why? Well, because non-disabled people are part of the problem. It's one thing to have a non-disabled person tell you that they understand your access needs and act as an ally, but it's quite another to sit around with a bunch of other disabled people and bitch about access issues amongst yourselves. Before 2011, I could count the number of disabled people I had spent quality time with on one hand. When I started to see more people who were like me, my world opened. Have you ever been a fan of an obscure book or movie? Liked a board game that no one else had ever played? Spoken a language that was hard to find other speakers of? For the non-disabled people, imagine that you'd finally found the people who you could talk to about it. That's what disabled Twitter was like for me. I made friends and a few enemies with disabled people all over the world. I made some mistakes and had to learn not to show my ass, but that's how activism works, isn't it? We're loud and brash, and we hope that we can find the way to learn to fail better on behalf of our fellow human beings. I also learned from my fellow disabled people about the internalized ableism I was carrying, and I started to undo it. One of the most crystallizing moments for me was when I got my first scleral shell in 2009. I'll spare you the details of how a scleral shell is made, but I can assure you that having an acrylic plastic mold made of your eyeball is nothing to sneeze at. I had 2 eyes made. One was the clear plastic conformer that allowed the viewer to see my occluded cataract, the eye that I have had since I was a month old. The other shell was painted to match my left eye. I watched as my ocularist carefully hand-painted my new eye, laying down small pieces of thread to recreate where a vein would be, carefully mimicking the pupil and the subtle green color of my eye. It took her several days to create a piece of art and armor that would protect me from the world. An opportunity that I had longed for. The rest of non-disabled society, I could look like everybody else. But when I put the painted shell in for the first time to go out and see friends, I caught a glance of myself in the mirror, and my blood ran cold. I didn't recognize myself. It felt wrong, like there was a bizarro Elsa staring back at me, a non-disabled woman I didn't know, and I didn't want to be her. I've very rarely worn the painted shell since, only bringing it out for job interviews and first dates, assuming that my occluded cataract would be a distraction from the person that I am. How is it that I believed a part of my own body could be a distraction from my personhood? But that's what ableism does. It tells us that the parts of us that are different, that do not match everyone else, must be hidden from view in order for us to be accepted. What I have come to understand is that the revulsion at my own face with 2 matching eyes instead of mismatched eyes was like a form of body dysmorphia. My vision of myself is a disabled body. Trying to morph it into a non-disabled one results in a strong psychological reaction. Abled society is constantly creating visuals of disabled people, transforming into non-disabled people as part of their dreamscape. In Glee, Artie gets up out of his wheelchair and dances an entire number before waking up. In The Shape of Water, Elsa sings. In The Theory of Everything, Stephen Hawking imagines picking up a pencil for a pretty undergraduate. These images are all meant to indicate that disabled people constantly want to envision themselves in abled bodies. But when I dream, I am still disabled. In fact, in my dreams, it's my adaptations that are better. I am able to sign with ease. Buildings are accessible. I walk across moors with my guide dog. I do not dream with binocular vision or dual stereo audio. I dream in the body that I inhabit. Some disabled people, of course, do dream of their past bodies. But in all the media examples, only Stephen Hawking would fit that bill. When I started to realize that I wasn't dreaming of a non-disabled future, but a future where my disability didn't matter so much, that's when I realized I needed to join the revolution. People evolve. One of the ways in which I evolved was that I stopped seeing myself as working within the system, fighting to change it, and I started to see myself as outside the system entirely. After all, if you're disabled, the system is literally not built to support you. You're not meant to benefit from it. I became a resistance fighter against ableism. It was a deliberate choice, one I made when I finally saw reality clearly. Accommodations were just that. They were given out begrudgingly, not out of genuine desire. It took laws to force non-disabled people to think about how disabled people lived their lives, not moral reality. When I started to think about how I lived in opposition to the ableist society I had been raised in, I grew a little bit taller. I stopped being so scared of myself. I had to get out of my own way. I had to stop worrying about what other disabled people looked like and focus on who I was and what made me disabled. I had to own the body I lived in and stop comparing it to everyone else's. The world will do plenty of that for you. Someone always wants to tell you who you're supposed to be. I had to put my head down and focus on what mattered to me. Of course, the world didn't want me to have equality, so I found myself on the front lines of the fight, kicking down doors to explain what it was like to live my life, instead of asking for permission to live it at all. I'm still learning. I'm still discovering more about myself than I knew before. Existing on the sliding scale of disability means that I am always relearning how to cast myself in opposition to the world I live in. There's no good way to survive in an ableist world. Just because I've got a decent self-image and a supportive community doesn't mean I don't suffer. I do. I get hate mail. I get trolls. I'm told that I am wrong for being proud. My identity is questioned on a regular basis, and there are days when I need to retreat to keep myself safe. Developing a self-identity out of defiance isn't something we should have to do. We should be able to grow in beauty and strength without having to constantly force ourselves to stop conforming to the systems that are already in place. What I wish non-disabled people did to support young disabled people is simple. I wish that they made space to have disabled people in their lives. To do that, we would need disabled teachers, disabled doctors, disabled parents, disabled people in all walks of life in all places. We would need to create a world that doesn't thrive on keeping us behind closed doors. And the language we use has to change too. There's so much ableism at the heart of the English language. Footnote, and others, get me started on French sometime. So many harmful metaphors. What happens when young blind women stop being the metaphor for ignorance? When deaf people are not bearing the brunt of the metaphors used for politicians who ignore their constituents? What happens when the non-disabled people in our lives become our collaborators in the fight against ableism instead of the tools of our suppression? For many, it's unwitting, but for every stray word, for every restaurant without an accessible bathroom, for every time I have to explain that truly, without a question, I am disabled, to a person who says they care about me and my life, there is a cost. I have to wear more armor. I long to show my soft underbelly to the world. I am not only the fierce knight I present to the world, I am vulnerable. I wish that the world could let me be both. In addition to wanting to sword fight, to debate, to fully unload my mind on the nearest target, I also want to sit quietly in a park and read a book. I want to snuggle and mutter about affection. Non-disabled people have the privilege of softness. They don't always have to be strong, but when I let my guard down, I become cute. I become vulnerable. That vulnerability is weaponized so easily. I've struggled to find a balance, and I'm still not there. I'm going to stop reading there. And before I start taking questions, I want to share a story of something I did a couple weeks ago. I went and volunteered at my daughter's school. They did a unit on Helen Keller. I'm going to pause for all the deafblind people in the room to wince. All of these non-disabled kids, about 70 of them, I looked them all in the eye and I said, I want you to tell me what you think about the story of Helen Keller. and what it tells you about disability. And these 70 second graders told me that my life and Helen Keller's life sounded sad, crazy, helpless, hard, confusing. And I looked at the second graders and I said, well, you're wrong. And now you get to ask me any question you've ever had about being a deafblind person for the next 40 minutes, and I subjected myself to that. And at the end of those 40 minutes, I asked the second graders to make another word cloud. And their word cloud had changed. Instead, they said that disability was beautiful, that it was interesting, that it was exciting, that they were curious. And all that took was not presenting the story of Helen Keller as a tragedy for her parents, but presenting the story of Helen Keller as someone else's life experience. And I'm telling you that because I think there is hope for changing ableism. I do not think we have to continue living in a world where children grow up thinking that it's hard or sad to be disabled, where we can actually have non-disabled kids think disabled parents are cool. Now, every time I'm at the school volunteering, there is one second grader who signs hello to me. Doesn't matter how far she is away from me in the hallway, she signs hello. And other kids are starting to pick up on that. Some of them ask me if I will teach them more signs. Now, my ASL is not great. I'm still learning. But the fact that hearing non-disabled kids have decided they want to learn ASL is a big deal to me, because it's not some weird thing that people are doing, which is what kids said when I was in elementary school. First, it was, well, we learned some sign to sing this one song in elementary school, and that was it. And then it was just a weird thing some people did. But I think there's hope. And so I wanted to share that hope because I think it matters. And the opportunity to help change it matters a lot to me. Now that we've had our interpreter change, we're ready to start taking questions, because I think it's going to be a little bit like playing telephone.
We have one here in the front row.
Hi, my name's Jessica. First of all, liked your book. What's your daughter's name and how old is she?
So I'm not going to share my kids' names because I want them to have their privacy, but they're 5 and 7.
Oh, sweet. Okay. And I did like your book.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions on Zoom, sir? Not yet, okay.
Keith here, making sure that I also have tactile communication happening with my friend here. So the title Being Seen, as a deaf-blind story, I felt that was a bit ironic, or was that intentional? Being Seen, can you tell me a little bit more about that title choice?
Well, one thing I'll tell you is that you don't really get to pick your title. That's one of the tricky bits of publishing. But you're correct that it's kind of a joke. A lot of the theories that this book is built on are by disability theorists like Rosemary Garland Thompson, who talk about the way that we view disabled bodies. And so part of what this book is about is how disabled people, especially deafblind people, are viewed, even when we can't necessarily see how we're being viewed. So much of our experience gets filtered through visuals, even though we can't always see what people are talking about, that it's hard to escape the language of sight. So you're correct. There's some deep irony in the title. I really wanted to call it Batgirl, but I was told that that was a copyright infringement. We had a few other titles bouncing around. I also thought about stealing a Helen Kellerism and calling it Alone in the Light. Again, a play on light.
Helen Keller, Alone in the Light?
Yes. Her famous quote that a lot of sighted people like to use is, "It's better to walk with a friend than be alone it's better to walk with a friend in the dark than be alone in the light."
Jessica, you have another question?
Yes. Did you ever consider being a comedian?
My husband is currently laughing in the back. That is one of the things that I keep being told I need to do. I have an entire bit on dating in New York City while blind.
Do you really?
Sadly, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ellie. My name's Ellie. And I'm a white woman with brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt and pink pants. And I am wondering about your opinion. I love your Twitter. That's how I found you originally, was through your Twitter account. And I'm wondering about your opinion about the current state of Twitter.
Oh, God.
And if you intend on building the disability community somewhere else, because I know that there's been a lot of talk about that online.
There has been. Right now, you can find me on TikTok, which is not the most deafblind friendly platform. I would like to find a better alternative than Twitter, but right now Twitter is what we have, which is why there are a lot of disabled people sticking around. I cannot for the life of me figure out Mastodon. I don't know if I'm too blind or if I'm too old. Yes. like the mammoth. Yes. And it's really tricky. I think that it's one of those things where social media platforms have changed so much, and because we're losing a platform essentially to fascism, I'm at a loss. So yeah, it's a tricky question. I will stay on Twitter until it burns to the ground. It is where I built my presence. I think I went viral for the first time yelling about the Mr. Magoo movie. And I think my most recent claim to fame was pointing out that Helen Keller was actually deafblind to the TikTokers, and that didn't go well for me. But then we had a coup, and so all the hate mail just kind of diverted somewhere else. Yeah, it's actually a real tragedy. Twitter has been an important space for disabled people for the last 10 to 12 years. And I see people centralizing on TikTok, but again, it's not the most accessible place for everyone. So I'm not sure what's going to be next.
Thank you.
Someone online has asked if you could define ableism.
Can you say what she said? Elsa says
I can't hear them. Okay, so ableism is the ism for disability. Essentially, it is the disability version of, well, sexism. It's the societal structure by which we dislike disabled people and discriminate against them. So it's a social structure. And ableism is related to autism, which is the specific ism that is toward deaf people. So there's a couple of different vectors for ableism, but they all centralize on if there is something different about the way that your body interacts with the world, whether it's your senses or your physical being, that's what's wrong with you, and society is going to shun you for that. That's what ableism is. And it's incredibly toxic, and it's everywhere.
Hi, my name's AJ. I'm deafblind. And I was wondering about how you view your identity as a deafblind person. In my community, we focus on pro-tactile, and that's definitely part of my identity, and it's a strong cultural identity as opposed to a medical identity. You know, and I've spent a lot of time, as we know, that sighted deaf folks have had to contend with this issue for many, many years.
Sighted blind people.
Hearing blind, excuse me, excuse the interpreter, have had to deal with that medical model as well, but I'm wondering about your take on that, the difference between a medical model versus a cultural model of deafblind.
I love this question. So for me, because I exist with both a visual loss and a hearing disability, I have both. My physical experience and my embodied experience of the world is radically different from non-disabled people. It also is different from blind people I know, and it is different from deaf people I know. Like it centralizes around my embodied experience. I was denied access to pro-tactile as a kid. I didn't have that experience, and I've always wanted to have more of that cultural component within my life, but it wasn't something I had access to. And so for me, it's been about embodiment. That's where my identity has come from. But it's also cultural, that I feel very connected to the disability community, and I have been working my way into deaf-blind communities and deaf communities and blind communities as those opportunities have presented themselves.
I have a godson who's not quite 4 yet, and for the last year and a half at least, he's been learning sign language. The school he attends at the University of Washington, the experimental education unit, is prioritizes inclusivity. And so he's already teaching me. And it makes me hopeful. And I was wondering, where do you see signs of hope?
I think I see signs of hope in spaces where disabled people are being included. As an example, when disabled people are invited to be in writers' rooms in Hollywood, when we get to tell our stories instead of them being told for us, that's one of the big spaces that I see hope. It's not happening quickly, but it is happening. I also will go back to the story I told at the end of my reading. I think kids right now are more open to understanding disability than they were when I was a little kid. I've certainly seen more openness with this most recent generation. It's not just about their openness to being queer or being gender nonconforming. We've seen a lot of those changes in this generation. But it's also about being more inclusive of disabled people. I've seen that too. I also see it in, and this is sort of a me-centered thing, but the fact that universities are actually assigning my book feels pretty hopeful. I don't think I would have imagined a university assigning this book where I say ableism regularly at the university level, but it was the central book of the year for the University of Northern Michigan this year. Their entire diversity program was centered around this. So the fact that academics are saying my book is worth reading to teach disability theory, and they're not relying on non-disabled people and non-disabled texts to do that, that feels like a shift.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question over here. So my name is Bruce. I'm a deafblind person here in Seattle. I've been here for a while. And I was curious, your book, what was the goal that you wanted to accomplish? And the question I really want to ask is about your title. You said you wanted to be called Batgirl, but you're like, shit, I had to change it. So now your book and your manuscript that you wrote, when you gave it over, I'm sure that change, that content, or the publisher, how he edited it, did it change the content, any of his editing?
So my goal with this book was to write a text that was not nice. And what I mean by that is a lot of the disability memoirs that I had seen were about inspiring non-disabled people to be nicer to us or to think that we were equal to them, or to make you think it's really cool that a blind person can climb Everest. And I was really tired of that because I shouldn't have to be exceptional to have equal rights. And so I wanted to write a book about the societal stuff that's going on that wasn't nice, because I was kind of tired of being nice to non-disabled people about things that really we shouldn't have to be nice about. And shockingly, the publisher didn't change that. The book isn't nice. It is not as mean as it could have been. I still walk people through things, but I didn't tiptoe around non-disabled people's feelings. And that is often the expectation, and that was what I didn't want to do. So that's part of my goal, is to get people to hear us without having to be nice.
AJ here again. One more question here. What was I thinking? In the protactile world, it's a language that's conducted through touch. So that's something that I always emphasize as a deafblind person, is that I engage with the world through touch. That's priority number one. And there are other ways to engage with the world, but they don't get me the information I need. So I have to engage with the world through touch. And so I just really was sad to hear that you were restricted from having that opportunity as you grew up. And so I was wondering, what do you do now? Are you working and using protactile with your family, or with your children? When you engage with the world, are you using that as a communication strategy?
Not yet. I do use ASL with my kids. They're hearing, so they're sometimes resistant to it, sometimes they're not. It sort of depends. But protactile is something I want to learn. I do engage with the world very significantly through touch. Touch is how I get information about my surroundings, whether it's through a cane or through my hands. I use physical body space to understand my context in ways that I don't think, actually I know this, sighted people don't do this. Other blind people to some extent don't use their bodies the same way I do. And so I do communicate with my own space and my understanding of the world through physical touch. I don't know protactile, but I want to. And it makes me really sad too.
AJ here again. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. I'm not sure if the interpreter is being as clear with my comment. You know,
Protactile is just one thing. It's been around just for about 15 years old, but that be nice, that old-fashioned kind of stuff, not using touch, is, to me, so far outdated. And now everything is touch all the time. And that's really one of the key concepts of protactile. And for so many people, touch is taboo, right? So many people, but we just have to be persistent and relentless and really get in there and ingrain the value of touch ubiquitously throughout society. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? So that it's more appropriate. It feels
Yes.
appropriate instead of inappropriate.
Yes.
I don't know if you've had that experience your own self, but touch as being an inappropriate thing, we need to really
Yes, that actually resonates for me in different ways because I have had to learn how to do things with my hands that other people don't learn. And I recall a lot of times asking for people to show me with my hands. Like, please use my hands to guide me when it comes to learning how to use this object or get through this space. And you're right, sometimes people say, don't touch that, for example. And it's like, well, I can't see it well enough to learn unless if you let me. One of the most freeing experiences for me was, yeah, okay, we've gotten the communication sorted. One of the most freeing experiences for me was when I went to France about 5 years ago, and I walked into a museum, and it was Versailles. And one of the museum curators saw that I was wearing hearing aids and I had a white cane, and his response was to grab my hand and put it on a 200-year-old statue. They don't do that in America. But I got to feel up all of these statues that I could not see. And I actually understood what the art was, in some ways for the first time ever, because with my vision, I can't see statues from 10 feet away. They're blurry.
oh wow.
So, yeah, touch is vital. Touch is how we learn.
I think there was Riley and Keith and Jessica.
Yes.
You can go, Jessica.
Okay. I'm completely blind as well, so I understand. I see with my hands too, so that's a comment. So I understand, but I can, so I would have to, I can hear, but I just have to be able to, I use a cane too, just like you do.
Did Keith have a question?
Yes, I do.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Jessica.
Here, AJ. So Keith here. I have a follow-up on the link. I wanted to talk about LinkedIn. I have been noticing that it's showing up more and more on LinkedIn. There's this hot topic of accessibility all over the place there on that platform, talking about different companies, employment, different programs, you know, all kinds of different things related to accessibility. So it's really seen that at the senior level too, at the executive level, where they're really thinking about accessibility finally and having accessibility departments and things like that. but then not having deaf-blind people in those roles. Like, you know, and of course we have the DEI as well, the diversity, equity and inclusion departments now. And they say that about 70 to 80% of the executives in those departments are white. So how does that represent DEI needs? So, you know, they need to have BIPOC people leading those types of initiatives. And you're seeing that happening in the accessibility world as well, where it's not being led by disabled people. And so we really need to, like you were saying, push for disabled people to be in these leadership roles. Inclusion is important, yes, but you know, you have to have it happening from the grassroots, from the people who are impacted.
100%. I work as an accessibility specialist at a tech company. That's my day job, because writing books does not pay the bills. And I tell you what, the tech world is still not caught up. It's really frustrating. I fought to get into an accessibility position, and I really wish that I had a, frankly, leadership role. I wish I were working at a higher level in tech, because I think that is where we belong. Disabled people should be leading accessibility departments, and we should be in executive roles in DEI. You're correct that BIPOC folks need to be leading the way, but I believe that disabled people also need to be in those spaces, because if you're not disabled, you don't know the full extent of the reality. And I find that every day. I have met people who are non-disabled who work in accessibility who try to tell me how to do my job. It does not go well. Actually, it goes very badly because the minute that you try to tell me how disabled people work, if you haven't been listening to us, you don't actually know. One of the most important spaces where disabled people need to be included, and this is where my spouse is going to laugh, is in product management. Because product managers are the people making the things that we use. And if it's not accessible, guess what doesn't happen? Disabled people don't use it. And they can't use it because you didn't think about the accessibility when you thought up the product. So yes, product management needs to have an accessibility component. We need to be putting it not just in accessibility spaces, but everywhere. And to just quote every disability protest ever, nothing about us without us.